Hello, this is Koba-sensei from ITeens Lab. In this video, I'm going to talk about Unity 6, which has just been released. I'll be explaining what makes Unity 6 different from previous versions of Unity like 2018 or 2022. Up until now, the ITeens Lab video series has used Unity versions from 2018 to 2022. But this time, Unity has rolled out a major update called Unity 6. They've released this major update. When using Unity 6, there are some points where beginners might stumble, as well as a few minor changes. So, I'd like to go over those areas and explain them in this video. Alright, so here I've listed 5 points. The main differences, things to watch out for, as it says here. Basically, for beginners using Unity 6, I've summarized what you need to be careful about and the main differences from previous versions. First, creating a new project is a bit different, and so is creating scripts. There are fewer using decorations, there are 2 types of input systems, and there are also 2 ways to create UI. So, these are the 5 main differences. I've summarized them here. Now, let's go through them one by one. First, I'd like to look at the first point, the differences when creating a new project. Here we have Unity Hub. Alright, so let's try creating a new project from here. Alright, so on this new project creation screen, you can select the editor version from here. Right now, it's set to Unity 6. You can also change this to Unity 2022 if you want. Alright, so with the previous versions of Unity, the default selection at the very beginning was usually the 3D built-in render pipeline. However, with the introduction of Unity 6, when you now try to create a brand new project, it automatically defaults to the universal 3D render pipeline. That's what's selected by default. The 3D built-in render pipeline is listed below this option. Basically, for beginners, you should use the 3D built-in render pipeline. If you proceed as usual and just create a new project, it will automatically start with Universal 3D, so be careful about that. Now, let's get into the specifics. The Universal 3D, also called URP, and the built-in. So, what's the difference between these pipelines? Well, the way they handle graphics processing is different. There aren't huge differences overall, but as you actually use them, you might run into situations where the graphics don't work as expected or things get a bit more complicated with this one. That's more likely to happen here, at least for now. So, for beginners, I recommend starting with this one. Alright, so that's what you should keep in mind when creating a new project. Next, there are also some differences when creating scripts, so let's take a look at that. Okay then. I'll go ahead and launch projects in both Unity 6 and Unity 2022. Alright, to make it easy to understand, I'll name the Unity 6 project Test 6. Okay, as you can see, Unity 6 has now launched. Here, it says Unity 6. Alright. The basic look and operation are, well, not really different from the previous versions of Unity. So, I'll also try launching Unity 2022. Alright, and to keep things clear, I'll name it Test 2022. Alright, so here Unity 2022 has launched. Now, I have both open at the same time, but it's a bit hard to tell them apart, so I'll change the color of the 2022 version. From here, I'll set it to dark mode. Okay, the one that's now black is 2022. The white one is Unity 6. Alright, now let's look at the differences when creating scripts. So, in the traditional versions up to 2022, in these ITeens Lab videos, we've explained this part quite a lot, but you right-click inside the project window, then select Create. C# script. Yes, just like this. This is how you create a script. Alright, now on the Unity 6 side. Unity 6 is pretty similar, but when you go to create, there isn't a C# script option. Instead, you select this one here, MonoBehavior script. I'll go ahead and change the name a bit. Yes, that's the only difference. In Unity 6, there isn't a C# script option under Create, so make sure to select this MonoBehavior script instead. Also, under the scripting section, you'll see things like MonoBehavior script and a few others, but honestly, beginners probably won't need to use those. So, just remember that basically, you'll be creating a MonoBehavior script. So, that's the second point. When creating a script, the options are a bit different. Next, let's talk about how there are fewer using declarations. Alright, so let's actually open up a script that was created in 2022. Okay, it looks something like this. Let me zoom in a bit. Now, let's open up the one created with Unity 6. Alright, so this is the script made with Unity 6. I'll rearrange them so they're easier to compare. Alright, this is the script made with Unity 2022. And this is the script made with UT6. The contents are almost the same, but there are just a couple of small differences. It's these top two lines. In the 2022 version, there are 2 lines at the top. In the case of UT6, those top 2 lines aren't written, and that's all there is. So, the using declarations at the beginning are a little different. Now, you might be wondering what exactly is different here. The using statements are basically for importing functions from outside, or in other words, for loading and using libraries. So, if you want to use the features included in these 2 lines here, you might run into some trouble. In UT6. Alright, so, specifically, as explained in the ITeens Lab video, there's the I enumerator. I think there might be something to watch out for when you use this. Normally, when you type IE like this, I enumerator will show up as a suggestion or autocomplete candidate like this. So, this I enumerator is often used when you want to make a program that, for example, waits for a few seconds or something like that. Alright, now for Unity 6. In the script for Unity 6, let's try typing IE as a test. Right. The I enumerator doesn't show up, and that's a bit of a problem. So, that means you need to write the using statement yourself. It's using system.collections. Once you add this, you'll be able to use I enumerator. Yes, when you type IE, I enumerator will now show up. This is a bit of a minor detail, but I think it's an important difference. Alright, so as the third difference, there are fewer using declarations in Unity 6, and I don't think that'll cause much trouble. But, as I mentioned earlier, when you want to use I enumerator, you'll need to write this out. There might be a few other times when you need to write it out, but for beginners, I think this is probably the only place you'll run into it. So, to sum up, as the third difference, if you want to use I enumerator, make sure to write out the using declaration. That's basically it. Now, let's look at the remaining 2 differences. Fourth, there are 2 types of input systems. This part can get a bit tricky, so let's take a closer look. Alright, here we are. I'm looking at the script for Unity 2022. For example, let's try working with input. This is precisely how it effectively responds. Basically, it's quite simple. When the space key is pressed, it immediately displays a clear message saying test. That's exactly how this particular process works. Alright, so for those of you who haven't progressed with the video yet, you might not understand some things, but this input system, well, it could be from your computer keyboard, your mouse, or later on, even smartphone taps or PlayStation buttons, and so on. Basically, when you play a game, it's the function that receives input from external devices. This is what we call the input system. Okay, let's take a look at it. Alright, in Unity 6, for example, if you attach this to an object and play it. Yes, just like this, when you press the space key, test is displayed properly. However, with Unity 6, there are some changes to be aware of. Alright, now I'll try writing the script I wrote earlier in 2022 in Unity 6. Okay, so this is Unity 6 right now. This one. I'll paste it in and try running it, and as you can see, an error pops up here. So, if you do it the same way as before, you'll get an error like this. Now, what should you do about this? Actually, it's pretty simple. Open the project settings. Inside project settings, there's something called Player. Yes, this one. There's a place where you can choose the input system, active input handling. Right here. You have the old type, the traditional type, the new type, and both. There are these three options. Right now, since we're trying to use the new input system while still writing code the old way, it's causing an error. So let's select both here. If you apply the setting to use both, Unity will restart like this. Alright, now that Unity has restarted, let's try running Unity 6 again. Now, when I press the space key, it works properly this time. Okay, let's check and make sure. If you look at the input section in project settings, you'll see that both is selected here. Alright, for beginners, this is the first thing you need to pay attention to. When you create a new project in Unity, remember to set the input system to both. So, about this input system, as I mentioned, there are two types. There's the traditional input system that we've been using up until now, and then there's a completely new input system. Honestly, I can't really recommend the new input system for beginners. I think it's better suited for intermediate users and above. So, for beginners, you should stick with the traditional input system for now. In the ITeens Lab videos, we use the traditional input system for explanations, so even if you're using Unity 6, you don't really need to worry about this part. Just make sure to properly set the project settings as I mentioned earlier. Now, as a quick supplement, let me briefly explain what the new input system is. Here, this is the Unity 6 screen. You'll see something called Input System Actions here. When you start a new project, this is included from the beginning. So, this here is related to the new input system. If you double-click it, it opens up like this. There's a lot written here, but about this new input system, let's say we're going to make a game from now on. You might play it on a PC or on a smartphone or even on a PlayStation. You can imagine playing on all sorts of platforms and different gaming devices. At times like that, it would be a hassle to rewrite the entire program for each one. So what we do is, for example, group things like the left stick on a game controller, the joystick, or the WASD on a PC and program them all together as movement controls. And then, for example, changing the look direction. On a gamepad, that would be the right stick, and on a PC, it would be moving the mouse. Right. So, things like that, we use those as inputs for changing the viewpoint and create the program accordingly. Alright, so if you want to make the game you created playable on various platforms, the new input system is actually pretty good, but for beginners, it can be a bit of a hurdle to learn. So, until you actually start thinking about releasing your game on various platforms, I think it's fine not to use this new input system. Alright, finally, let's take a look at the fact that there are two ways to create UI. So, here as well, there's the Canvas UI, sometimes called UGUI, which is the traditional method, and starting from Unity 6, there's a new feature called UI Toolkit. The same goes here. Basically, for beginners, I recommend sticking with the traditional Canvas UI or UGUI. As for this UI toolkit, I feel it might be a bit difficult unless you have some experience with HTML, CSS, or web design. In the ITeens Lab instructional videos as well, we basically use the Canvas UI. So, even if you're using Unity 6, beginners don't really need to worry about it for now. So, I think it's best to just ignore the UI toolkit for now and try working with the Canvas UI. I'll also go ahead and explain the differences between the two. Alright, this is the Unity 6 screen. Okay, so when you want to display UI elements like buttons or text on the screen, you can right-click in the hierarchy window, go to UI, and then select text. You can add things like that. Yes, from the UI menu. You can also add buttons, for example. Yes, and just like this, you can place buttons or text on the screen. That's how it works. This is what I mentioned earlier, the traditional Canvas UI feature. That's what this is. And in addition to this, there's also something called the UI Toolkit, so I'll show you that as well, just in case. You can create things like this. When you do that, a screen called the UI Builder will open up like this. And within this interface, you'll go through the process of designing your UI here. It looks something like this. So, with this UI Builder, you can display text or add buttons to the screen and so on. But as I mentioned earlier, this tool isn't really aimed at beginners. It's more for intermediate or advanced users. So, for beginners, don't worry too much about this part. First, try learning how to create a UI using this canvas here. And as for the new features I mentioned earlier, the new input system and this UI toolkit, I'm planning to make separate tutorial videos about those. So for now, beginners, don't worry about these parts and just go ahead and move forward. Alright, let me wrap things up. When you create a new project, choose the built-in render pipeline. When you make scripts in Unity 6, start with a monobehavior script. As for using statements, you'll mainly need them when you want to use IEnumerator. So be mindful of that. Also, there are two input systems. You can manage both of them from the project settings. Select both and configure them accordingly. There are two ways to create UI, but basically, the standard Canvas UI should be just fine. That concludes my explanation of the differences between Unity 6 and previous versions, as well as the common pitfalls for beginners. Thank you very much.